Welcome to Pleasure in the Pause, a podcast dedicated to inspiring midlife women to feel more connected to their bodies, pleasure, and power through perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. I am your host, Gabriella Espinosa, and I am so happy that you're here. I've spoken about how my intention with this podcast is to invite you to shift the way you think and feel about your pleasure, sexuality, and menopause. I really do think midlife can be a wonderful new chapter in our sexual lives, and we get to choose what that looks like for us. But sometimes that process does take a bit of soul searching, letting go of inherited narratives, limiting beliefs, and shame around what it means to be a woman fully owning her pleasure. And it can also feel a bit daunting, I feel, because we don't really have a roadmap for it. My very special guest today is going to guide us in making sense of your unique journey towards sexual empowerment through the lens of a beautiful ancient myth. Carly Mountain is a psychosexual somatic therapist, women's initiatory guide, breath worker, and the author of this gorgeous book I have in my hands, Descent and Rising, Women's Stories and the Embodiment of the Inanna Myth. Her work has evolved over 20 years of working in sacred practice, embodiment, and sexuality. She joins us today from Sheffield, England, where she lives with her husband and 2 daughters. Welcome, Carly. So lovely to be here with you.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
So I love your body of work, and I'd love for you to start off with just giving us some context of the work that you do. What is a psychosexual somatic therapist? I've never had one on the show before, so I'm excited for our audience to learn what that fascinating field is all about.
Thank you for asking. Yeah, so I think when we think of psychotherapists, we often think about the mind. When we say psyche, we often think about our minds. But actually, psyche comes from the Greek meaning soul. So for me, when I work with people, I'm always holding a soulful practice. And how does the soul express itself? Well, it tends to express itself through our embodied beingness, through the way we show up in our bodies and in our lives. And so bringing sexuality into that, we're looking at basically the way that our embodied soulful sexuality is manifesting in our lives or not, the ways that it's being thwarted, stopped, suppressed. And so what I really do is work with people to inquire around that. Some people come to me specifically for sexual issues. Other people come to me to work with trauma or a whole range of things. But I think what's interesting about sexuality is because it's so taboo in our culture still, we're kind of either hypersexualized or there's a lot of suppression and shame. Even when people see that I'm a sex therapist and they arrive with me, they often struggle to talk about sex. And so even when you're entering a held space where you're moving into a relationship with a sex therapist, you've sought one out, there can still often be this barrier to actually really bringing those themes out into the room. So I'm really passionate about creating spaces where sex can be integrated into the wholeness of our lives rather than sex just being something that's over here in a separate space and then the rest of our lives is continuing over here. So how do we bring our whole selves into the therapy room and work with it?
Such beautiful and necessary work. Thank you so much for giving us that context. And I know you incorporate a lot of the foundations of your work into your book. I sometimes feel reading your book, I'm going through a therapy session many, many times over. I came across your book just as it was published a little over a year ago, right? I had not even heard of the Inanna myth. And as I read through it, and here you can tell I've dog-eared it in so many places that touch me so deeply because it allowed me to make sense of so many moments in my life, especially my journey through perimenopause and menopause. And I often reflect about the time I spent in perimenopause, saying that it was like, with regards to my sexuality, saying it was like the light to my libido switched off and I was left totally in the dark. And that time period lasted, a good 7 years, I think. And I had attached my own meaning to what happened during those years. And I've even written about it, shared about it on my Instagram posts. But then in reading your book, I totally saw myself in this book and thought, oh my God, Carly knows exactly what I'm talking about. And I realized, that place of darkness, that descent that you talk about really ended up being the place where I got to know myself and was gifted the tools to rise and come out the other side feeling wiser, stronger, sexier, and more empowered. And like I said, I saw so many parts of myself in the book, of this story of Inanna that is thousands of years old, and came away feeling that she holds all of our individual and collective stories as women. And I felt it validated my journey in such a potent and beautiful way. So thank you so much for writing this book. I'm so grateful that you brought it into the world. So I'd love to start by asking you, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, thank you, firstly, for sharing your experience and for highlighting that dark place, because I think that's why I wrote it. I had been in the dark too, and not through perimenopause. This was in my early 30s, but I came across the myth in another woman's book, Linda Hartley, and it was like all the lights switched on. I was like, oh my goodness, this is a map of my life. But of course, it isn't a map of my life. But like you, it really resonated with me so deeply and personally that it felt like it was. And I think that the maps that we have as women and as people in general in this culture are very much on the upward trajectory a lot of the time. And the beautiful thing about Inanna is it's about those dark places that we drop into, those places where transformation and change, big changes in our lives happen, that often in our culture we're encouraged to medicate over or try to patch up and move on or fight through or cover over. And so I wrote the book to try and provide others with a map for those dark places, because I just felt that I'd learned so much. And the women that I was working with at the time in circle with the myth were saying, please, can you write this down? I really would love you to write this down, what you're teaching. And it just made me realize how needed it was. And when we went into COVID, it felt like a great big descent, collective descent, and space to write the book. So yeah, I really wanted it, more people to know about it, because like you're saying, I think it is so validating and supportive when we're going through those breakdowns or shedding of skins that different life passages take us through.
Yeah, it is. It is that inner work that we all talk about. I call it the inner work of menopause. For me, it was the inner work of menopause, really stripping back those layers, not trying to find a quick fix solution for what I was feeling. And I know right now there's so much awareness around menopause, and I think it's great. But I think, yeah, with all that awareness comes the shadow side of it. Like, okay, we know about it. Let me figure it out quick, fast. And I think we can tend to just eliminate this very important work that needs to be done, this transformation that you talk about. And in that transformation is a lot of discomfort. It's not about suffering, really. It is really about meeting ourselves with the discomfort and kind of exploring what's there to be discovered. I know that you start the book by putting it into the context of the heroine's journey. Can you talk about what exactly is the heroine's journey, what this entails, and is it a journey that we choose or one that finds us? I'm so curious.
So I think it's both. The hero's journey that we're more familiar with is where one goes out into the world, battles whatever things that you need to face, and then comes back with the goods from the outside in, if you like. with the heroine's journey, it's the reverse. We go into the dark, we go inside, and it often happens in the sort of what I call the kitchen of our lives. And we go down into that material. And so it really speaks to women's journeys because obviously our bodies are set up for that from our first bleed, if not before. We're internal creatures. Our sexual organs are internal. That's how our energetic system is set up. We have to dive inwards in order to uncover ourselves. And this myth really speaks to that. The heroine's journey is not about putting armor on, it's about shedding skin, taking armor off. So Inanna is all about becoming more and more naked. And that's what happens to her. She goes down into the underworld, and at each of the gates, she takes off another item of her clothing, which represents her identity and aspects of herself that either she's outgrown or that were never truly her in the first place. And this is why I think I've heard from so many women who say, gosh, this speaks to my menopause journey, because I think that's what this midlife stage is about. It's very much about taking off the layers of identity that no longer serve us or maybe never served us, so that we can come closer and closer to who we truly are, what our true desires are, and how we want to be in the world. And when we frame it that way, for me, though there's a vulnerability there, there's also a really exciting, lifeful invitation there of, oh, wow, what a relief. I get to shed all this stuff that I actually don't want to be and maybe never wanted to be, and to reveal who I really am and what I really want in this next phase of my life. And so I guess it's what I call a choiceless choice. Our bodies are changing in midlife. Our lives are changing. Our hormones are changing. That's not a choice. Aging is something that's coming to us, whether we like it or not. And yet, how do we make an empowered choice to be with those changes and discover the fruit inside of ourselves as we shed layers? Because I feel like, it takes 40 odd years to bear the fruit of some of the things that begin to come out in perimenopause and menopause. And you can't get that in your 20s. So what are the fruits of this period of time? And can this sloughing off of skins, this revealing, allow us to come really closer to our own juice and wisdom?
That is such a beautiful way to frame it. And I know that women who are listening can relate to that shedding of skin, shedding of old identities, and really trying to figure out who we want to be in the second half of life. I know there are so many parts to the Inanna myth that can't be covered just in one conversation, but can we just take a little step back, and can you tell us who is Inanna and walk us through her story just in a very broad way if you can?
Sure. So Inanna is an ancient goddess of sex, fertility, and war. She comes from ancient Sumerian society, which was around 5,000 years ago, and it's pre-patriarchal. And so some of her medicine is that she didn't emerge out of the same kind of structures that we have known in our culture now. And so the main premise is that she chooses to go to the underworld, unlike, say, Persephone, who is said to be a later version of Inanna, who was taken to the underworld by a dark god. She actually chooses. She's in agency. But as she goes down to the underworld to meet with her dark sister, Ereshkigal, who's the queen of the underworld, who's been exiled there. So if we want to use this as a metaphor for our lives, what we could say is that Ereshkigal is the parts of ourselves that have not yet been met or are in what we might call shadow, in the darkness. And Inanna is like the queen of the upper world. She's queen of heaven. So she is the parts we're conscious of. She is the parts that we are known for in life. She's our current identity, our current way of being. And as she goes down through these 7 gates, she's stripped and the layers are taken off. And at every layer, she says, what is this? Because she's like, how can you be taking, I'm queen. You can't just take my throne. You can't take my crown and my robes. But this is the way life is sometimes, isn't it? It strips us. And I think this is what perimenopause and menopause does to an extent. It strips us. And so she goes down to the underworld. And these gates can also be thought of as embodied. So it can be thought of as our going down through our head, through our voice, through our heart and heartbreaks, through our power center of our solar plexus, through our gut, through our womb, ovaries, our vulva, our relationship with our sexuality. So it really is an embodied journey that she's inviting us to go through. And when she meets with her sister, Ereshkigal, she's not up for a loving reunion. And actually, in her rage, she stakes Inanna and leaves her on the wall to rot. So it's this sense of being fully stripped, something dying, so that something else can be reborn. And the second half of the story is the ways that she rises and how that whole rising process. So it really creates a map, a framework for both the going down into this very difficult places that we go to, and how we emerge, as you say, how after those, I think you said 7 years, how you emerged with more of a sense of self, more of a sense of your own desire and longing, and embodied in your body more deeply. Because while ever Ereshkigal, while ever those dark parts of us are being pushed down into the underworld, they're actually holding so much of our life force energy there. And if we can go down and meet those parts of selves and really get curious about, wow, what is my rage showing me? What is my loss of libido? Where is that desire? Why is it vanished? Or what is this grief that I'm feeling? When we get curious about those things and make relationship with them, then I find that the rivers of our life energy, our erotic energy, starts to flow again.
So beautiful. Yes, I've heard you say or write that this act of descending, which many of us can resist, right? There's a lot of resistance, especially as I mentioned before, if we're just looking for that quick fix. I don't want to go there, but you put it so beautifully. You say that to descend to this place is an act of self-love, that it's in this place of darkness that we cultivate the key ingredients to rise again from a place of truth, love, pleasure. And with so much talk about self-love and, that can feel very elusive to many of us. I love the way that you frame this, that it really is in that place where we get to know ourselves more, where we get to love ourselves. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I think it's really hard to do self-care practices for parts of ourselves that we don't like and don't know or don't want to know.
Yeah.
For example, and I think I give this example in the book, at the gate of the womb, where I give a lot of embodied exercises through the book, and one of them is womb dancing. And I've done this in women's circles virtually every single time. In every single group, there will be at least one woman, and she's the voice of this part of us in the group, that says, I don't want a relationship with my womb. It's given me nothing but trouble. That kind of thing. Now, try and put a self-care practice in the kind of more traditional sense on that. If you don't know about that disconnection or that dislike of your own womb, you can't just love it. You can't skip the part where you don't love it. So I think the whole point of descent is to go down and get really honest with ourselves about the parts of ourselves we don't yet love and have not welcomed, or are even furious with, or are ashamed of. And once we admit that, as in let it into our awareness, then we've got something to work with. And in my experience, and I think I say this in the book, true compassion for self, true self-love often arrives actually when we feel our heart break for itself. And that's a really hard place to meet, to really admit, gosh, I really can't be with this part of me. And usually as soon as we admit that, something can begin to shift. But it can be so hard to even admit that. So 2 key ingredients of the myth are empathy and compassion, but we can't force them. They are naturally arising They come in the rising part of the myth for a reason. They naturally arise or they don't. And I think we so often try to skip that difficult dark part and get to the goodies at the end.
Mm.
It's just not, I don't think it's possible. We can live that way. We can leave parts in exile for our entire lives, and many people do. But certainly my work is the work of going towards them and finding out what's there.
Absolutely. I feel that for many women in midlife, when we do this work or when we go through these changes, we are meeting parts of ourselves for the first time or trying to get to know that part in a different way. You talk about how we exile parts of ourselves. We orphan them, right? I certainly feel in my journey through motherhood, when I became a mother, I felt there was no room for my sexual self. I had to play the role, put on the identity of being the perfect mom, the soccer mom, the cookie baking mom. There was no room for the sexual side of me. So I kind of just, exiled her. I orphaned her. There's a beautiful thread in the book that I would like to pick up for our conversation. And that is, what does it mean to be a sexual being, fully engaged with life from this place of owning your sexuality? And how do we meet ourselves there anew? I mean, we have to meet ourselves there anew when we go through this journey of descent and rising, don't we?
Yeah.
Where do we start?
Well, it's a difficult one to answer in the sense of it's going to be different for everyone.
Mm.
What I really find fascinating about rites of passage, which is what I see perimenopause and menopause as, is that whatever was not tended to in the previous rites of passage in our life stages will come back up again to be tended to later. So what I find really helpful is to think of what was happening for me around the time I started bleeding, or in the time I became a mother. That's another life stage. Or if I didn't become a mother, and the things that I'm holding around that, perhaps. And likelihood is those will resurface again in perimenopause and menopause to be tended to. And that's going to look really, really different from woman to woman. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule for how we go about this, but I do feel like whatever was exiled back then will try to come up now to be known. And life will create all of the most trying circumstances.
Mhm.
If we're not listening, it will keep creating rupture in our life until we turn towards those parts and go, what's going on here? And so that for me is the doorway. The doorway is to feel what discomfort is arising and re-arising in our lives, whatever that is. So in your example, your beautiful example, it sounds like your sexuality started to, the exiled sexuality somehow started to come up, and then get curious about it and enter dialogue with it. And I give lots of embodied exercises in the book to help women to inquire about that and get to know those places.
Yeah, I love the exercises that you share in the book. It makes it very interactive, as well as the women's stories that you share. Yeah, one of the prompts, a very basic question, which I came up against, the journaling prompt is, I think, is, what do I desire? That is the journaling prompt. What do I desire? And for so many of us, we, like you said, we have suppressed that, and we don't know that answer. And it took me a while to figure that out, to even realize that I was worthy of having desires, because so much of my journey was being of service to others, pleasing others. My desires, my pleasure didn't really matter. And it really takes some time to find that answer. What do I desire? But so much of that is really part of the journey of descent and rising, or a big part of the journey of descent and rising is really exploring our desires and learning to trust our desires.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating. I'm so glad you brought that example of being a mother and exiling the sexual part in order to bring all of your energy to mothering. And one of the reasons I'm so interested in stories is because the cultural stories that we unknowingly and knowingly digest can really influence the way that we think we're supposed to be in these roles and in these phases of our lives. And the mother has definitely been split off from the sexual. It's a
Mm.
huge thing in our culture where mother has been sort of sanitized and the sexual's kind of over here. So how do we reclaim our sexuality as mothers and beyond that into perimenopause and menopause? Because I think the story of aging women is it's that very reductive story of sexless menopause, sexless midlife and the life thereafter. And it just doesn't have to be that way.
Mm.
And if we're not desiring, then for me, there's something really unmet inside of us, as you're saying so beautifully. And in that desiring exercise, it's specifically to set a timer for 3 minutes and to write on repeat, I desire, I desire, I desire, and to just uncensor and see what comes out. So I love doing that exercise because I find when we uncensor and we just let a pen flow across the page, it can really release something in us and take us to places we didn't expect. But when I work on this, it's an exercise I do with women, both in circles and in therapy sometimes. And often women will bump into exactly what you're saying. The pen will just be like, hmm? And they'll be like, and they'll look up and go, I don't know.
Mm.
So if that happens, my tip for you is this. And again, I name this in the book. Go towards what you don't want then. So I say to them, okay, can we flip the exercise around and can you write, I don't want da 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 on loop for 3 minutes. I don't want this. I don't want to lose my sexuality. I don't want to feel that I'm always in service to everyone else and not to myself. I don't want to feel, and to go down that list. And we do that. And then I encourage them to read it out loud. And then we'll work with the don't wants and we'll look for where the want is hiding inside it. So
Mm.
if I say to you, I don't always want to just be in service to others, then that tells me that there's a desire in there to be in service to myself. If there's a desire to, I don't want to always be at the bottom of my list, that tells me that you want to be at the top of your list for a bit, So going towards what we don't want can be a really powerful way of uncovering those hidden desires.
I love that. Yeah. I often, when I'm talking to my husband and expressing what I desire, I'm often expressing what I don't desire. What I don't desire. He's like, well, what do you desire? And it's so hard for me to say what I desired. And I guess I love that you're sort of flipping the script there. And I love that. I love that. I'm going to use that for sure. Next, when I'm voicing what I don't desire. Thank you so much for that. That is such a powerful exercise. I just wanted to go back a couple of steps to what you spoke about motherhood. And I know you believe that there is room for both, right? For motherhood, to be a mother fully embodying her sexual self. For those who are listening who are mothers and who have children at home still, what does this look like? I know I just wanted to share briefly. I know when I was going through this work, as I was rising, embodying my sexual self, my kids were older. They were late teenagers. And they just would look at me so strangely, like, who are you? We don't recognize you anymore. And there's this kind of separation that happens there that I felt at the time that felt it was painful because I was seeing it, but I felt it was so necessary. I felt it was necessary for me to see me as more than just a mother. And I think it was confusing for them. I wish I maybe at the time had a way to speak about it more. And I'm wondering if you can offer any guidance, if we have kids still at home and we're going through this journey of meeting ourselves anew as sexual beings and really trying to live in that space of motherhood and sexual beings. what do you recommend? Because I know you have daughters at home right now and you are role modeling that for them.
Good question, and a vast question, isn't it? Because again, the difficult thing about women's erotic energy, and I'm speaking about erotic energy here as life force energy, that includes the sexual, but is our whole creative beingness. That's how I see eroticism. And I feel like I don't just want to reduce it down again to only being women's fault that we feel erotically depleted as mothers. Because it's something about the cultural drain on mothers that needs to be included here. So we don't protect and look after mothers adequately in our cultural community in the West, I don't believe. And so mothers are expected to be not only mothers, but work and be everything for everyone. And I feel like this is really reflective of the way that we treat mothers and the earth as well. It's very much about depletion. And then we say to mothers, oh, and now you need to be sexual as well and find the energy to be sexy and feel good in your skin as well. And that's so hard. So I just want to recognize that, because I know that in myself as a mother, the places where my sexual energy has dropped to its lowest has been in those places of depletion where I've been trying to be everything for everyone and not suitably resourced. And so much about descent and rising is reckoning with the areas where we're not resourced and recognizing the need to be resourced, the need to plug into our support systems, ask for what we need, take care of ourselves as a priority. But that can be very difficult, I think, in a culture that doesn't do that for the mother, for women in general, actually. So there's that piece of it there that I just want to acknowledge, because I feel like it's a really big piece. And what I don't want to do is put it back on women's shoulders and go, well, it's your responsibility now. Having said that, what are the ways that we have embodied that persona of I will be the woman that does everything for everyone, and that we're drowning in it? I think that can be something about an identity that we need to slough off, the identity of being able to be and do it all. And actually to recognize what are our limitations. And when we reckon with those limitations, all of a sudden we become more resourced. It's a weird paradox. It's like, how do we recognize that actually we can't say yes to that? What a big part of rising is finding out what we're a yes to and what we're a no to, truly, from an embodied place. And what I found with rising was there are loads of places that I would say yes when I was under-resourced. And I had to start to take responsibility for my no. So a huge part of rising for Inanna is the place where she says, no, I will not sacrifice that. And where is our no? And so in order to find our yes for our desires, we have to also find our no. I am not able to do that for you right now. No, I am not able to offer you that right now, which I think can be a real stretch for a lot of women. And so if you're in a place of depletion and you're under-resourced, you are not going to have the space to feel super sexual. It's just not going to be on the table. And so for me, the place to begin is, what do I need to say no to so that I can prioritize my own body and start to build a reserve of erotic energy for myself and for my sexuality. And initially, that might mean that we can't jump straight into being sexual with someone else. It might mean that we just need to forage for being sensual and sexual with ourselves, which again, I find with many women I work with, that's like being sexual with myself. Like that's something I do with my partner, not on my own. Oh, really? And why is that? And we get curious about that. It's like, oh, what would it mean for you to set aside half an hour to tend to your own body and sensuality and maybe sexual energy as well? You know, that can be a real edge. So saying no, building up the reserves, and then seeing where that takes you. Because as soon as we start to say no and build a little bit of reserve, those desires go, oh, I'm resourced enough. Oh, maybe I want this. Oh, maybe that would be nice. Oh, I've got a bit of energy for that. And it starts to feed itself. And the thread will start to show us what we need and what we want. So yeah, finding our true desire and letting our energy reserves grow for ourselves, not just for others.
I love that you speak to this. I guess you're speaking to engaging in a self pleasure practice,
Yeah.
using it as a means of resourcing ourselves. And yeah, so many women are met with resistance to engage in that self pleasure practice. I know in the book you have a mirroring exercise where we meet ourselves in the mirror, stripped naked, and that itself can be so confronting. I talk to a lot of women who have issues around body image, feeling that they are broken, that they need to be fixed in some way. And so that first step, while so necessary, can be so confronting. And I love the way that you frame it in the book as a way of resourcing and meeting yourself anew. Really, it's really about befriending our bodies, meeting our bodies with compassion, and really getting to know ourselves in a different way.
Yeah, that exercise at gate 7 when she's completely naked in the underworld. And I think the invitation, as you say, to look in the mirror and really see ourselves and really look, because we often look at ourselves critically. How many times do we actually stand in front of a mirror and just observe and witness and behold ourselves and just behold ourselves with interest as we would for a piece of art or a garden that we love or something? We don't do that. But I mean, I guess with this being Inanna, the invitation is also to really look and see and feel the things that you're resistant to inside of that. And I do say in the exercise, if it's too confronting initially to be completely naked, to notice that and not skip over that, to really go, okay, I can perhaps take off my top and leave my bra and my trousers on for now, and that's enough for me. And to just do that much and get curious about, oh, what is the edge for me in revealing my body to myself? And if I can just take off this layer and look, how does that feel? And gradually maybe build up to doing the full naked practice if it feels right for you. But again, it's about meeting our resistances and admitting them, and then giving ourselves time. You mentioned earlier about the quick fix versus the longer journey. I feel like one thing about descent and rising is that it's not the quick fix or the quick journey. It is the slow time. It is really countercultural in that way. But it also has so many gifts when we can slow enough to really admit those things that are difficult to meet in ourselves, and then work with those edges until those edges start to soften and there's more availability to be more and more naked to ourselves. Potent, isn't it? Potent way to really meet ourselves naked.
I love that as a ritual that we can engage with. I had on the podcast a guest, Christine Marie Mason, who is the founder of an intimate care brand here in the US called Rosebud Woman. And she wrote this book called Reverence. And we were talking about what does reverence mean? And it's exactly what you're saying, meeting ourselves through ritual, through whether it's, a journaling prompt, or you have a very lovely practice of creating a beautiful altar in the book, or looking at ourselves in the mirror with that resistance, but slowly taking baby steps to meet ourselves from a place of honoring and devotion, and really tapping into that deep love for ourselves that is there. We're just not ready to embrace it, I feel. It's such a foreign concept for women, self-love. And it can sound so cliche, but it is that really tiny baby steps of meeting yourself anew and really trying to determine who you want to be and become, and really honoring yourself from this place of respect and reverence and devotion and paying attention, because in that attention is the love, right?
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of this journey can feel lonely. I feel. I love that you take women through this journey as part of retreats that you offer and workshops. I actually participated in the course that you offered where you took women through each chapter in community and allowing that space to be witnessed. I also had another guest last week, Anna Flores, where she talked about the importance of being in community with other women and the power of being witnessed and having a mirror. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, I mean, I think at the center of this myth is the theme of sisterhood. Sisterhood on the inside of us, the things we're estranged from internally, and the broken sisterhood on the outside of us. So the way that we are with other women, the way that we are with our actual sisters, if we have them, with our mothers, with our, with that part of our lineage as well. So yeah, I think that coming together with other women and finding a common language around this, particularly as well in perimenopause and menopause. I'm finding in my perimenopause process, checking in with my friends about what I'm going through feels really important right now because changes are so unexpected sometimes. I'm finding unexpected things happening and being able to just reach out to someone and go, God, I'm having this month. What? And I did this actually only last week, and my friend got back to me and said, I've been having the same thing. So there was just that solidarity there, and it just made me go, oh, I'm not alone. So yeah, I think it can be a really lonely process. And if we don't have those support systems, that might be a desire. It's certainly been a desire in me to, I often find myself being the one leading groups, but not always the one in the group, enjoying the nourishment of being in the group with others. I have had that, but I'm usually more often the leader. So a big desire for me over the last few years has been really trying to find more friendship and sisterhood and relationships of equality with other women. I think sisterhood is a massive theme, and so often patriarchal culture does set women against women, and I think that's a big theme in this myth. How is it that we've been estranged from other women, and how do we build support for and language for these rites of passage that we go through? And I'm so glad that menopause is spoken about more now, so that there is more of a common language growing, and women's experiences through work like yours, Gabriella, and others. We're creating language and community around it, and I think that's so nourishing. So really grateful for you creating this podcast.
Oh, thank you. And I think also such a gift that you offer also in those collective spaces as well as in the book is the permission to turn to so many emotions that we've suppressed. You talk a lot about in the book about anger and rage. So not only about turning towards desire and love, but those other emotions that we've been taught to hide or mask. And there is such power in allowing ourselves to feel that anger and that rage. I know both you and I are fans of the work of Kimberly Ann Johnson and this idea of healthy aggression and how we can use that to benefit us and how we show up in the world. Can you talk about that?
So I feel like if we don't have healthy aggression with us, then what we can do is default to what is often referred to as fawning or overly accommodating. And accommodation is a great thing to be able to do. It helps us to live in a cohesive society. But oftentimes, particularly women who, because of the estrogen in our bodies, when in our bleeding years, can be overly accommodating anyway, because our bodies are so set up to be attuned to the social nervous system. It can mean that we end up becoming the martyrs. We end up being sacrificed, essentially, for the sake of others and for whatever's going on in the space. So how do we use our healthy aggression? How do we contact our boundaries and work with, again, it kind of goes back to the no I was talking about earlier. I think an expression of healthy aggression, it doesn't have to be a massive, explosive, rageful, that we associate with rage. Actually, when we're in touch with our healthy anger, we can feel when that no comes up because we've thawed the freeze around any anger that we've had. When we can feel that healthy no come up, then we can just simply say, no, I can't do that right now. That can be an expression of my anger but it doesn't have to necessarily flare up. I think really big explosions of anger often come, like with Ereshkigal in this story, when everything's been suppressed down for so long that it has to explode out. And there's nothing wrong with that. But how do we start to work with our nervous system in such a way to notice the places where we over accommodate and start to understand more about why we've learned to do that and begin to listen to the know inside of us and honor it. And then for some women, they may have got really accustomed to being in aggression as a way of being and get stuck in fight. So they will flare up and be quite defensive in situations where actually it's not needed so much. And so for those people, it would be more about softening off the anger and seeing what vulnerability is hiding underneath. So again, there's very few hard and fast rules to working with these things. It's very much about presence and empathy with what's arising. But certainly I know in my own journey, my anger and rage has been suppressed and frozen down. So for me, it's been massively about thawing that and daring to realize that I am safe enough to express my no right now, or to express that I'm angry about that, I'm not happy about that. And that has really allowed me to be in agency more and more. And actually, if we're suppressing our anger, what I often find is we're suppressing some of our sexual energy as well, because we can't suppress one thing without the other. So as the anger starts to thaw, more of our passion can emerge, more of our desire can emerge. And we can find not only the voice for our no, but the things that we're like, I really want this. I'd really love you to do this. I'd really love to do this to you. And there's so much juice. There's Maya Luna, I really love her teachings around this. She calls the energies of both anger and our sexual energy as the red energies. And I love that. It's like, actually, gosh, those red energies, when we really start to listen to them and dare to honor them, lots of lovely, juicy things can happen.
I found, activating that healthy aggression is a beautiful way to, as you mentioned, to invite our partners into this journey with us, right? I think, like I said, it can feel very lonely. And as we start to rise and feel that we are embodying this sexual life force, this creative life force, we want to share it with others, right? And especially if we are in partnership, we want to bring them along for the ride. And it takes, I think, some skills to be able to do that, either with communication or through just role modeling it. How do you recommend we invite our partners into this rising with us?
Communication. I think it's really about communication, because the things we don't say are so powerful, aren't they, as much as the things we do say. And there's something in the book I talk about, if we don't make sacrifices, we become the sacrifice. So I think in partnership, that's a really interesting thing to play with. Like, where am I sacrificing parts of myself or things that I need to say or desires or whatever? Because I think that's what you need from me. Whereas actually, if I say it out loud, sometimes I give the other the opportunity to go, actually, it's not always what we think, but we can't know that until we say it. So I think daring to voice our desires or the things we don't want, the things we need, is so key, because it invites our partner to give their side of the story. I do a lot of work with the wheel of consent in the circles that I hold, and I find that that's the work of Betty Martin. If anyone wants to look it up, she's got loads of free resources online. But I find that so interesting, because it's all about this. It's all about finding the dialogue for what's not been said. You know, if I say, what often happens in sexual relationships is that one person can think that they're sacrificing their needs to give the other what they want, and the other person's focus is on sacrificing their needs to give the other what they want, and actually neither are getting what they want. It's all an imaginary thing. So if we think about sex, if I actually say to you, do you know what? This is what I'm feeling, and this is what I would like more of. How do you feel about that? it gives the other the opportunity to say, oh, interesting, I didn't know you felt like that. Or, oh, I thought you wanted this. And then we get to find out what the reality is. So I think it's about communication. And what are the areas that you're scared to talk about, and going towards those? Because actually, it's the things that are not being said that really need to be explored. So, how do we step into agency in that? We bring the conversation out and see what our partner wants to, how they can respond to that.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you speak, I think about how this can also be a journey if we're in partnership with men for them as well, right?
Yeah.
So this descent and rising is not only a feminine initiation, it could also be, we could also invite our partners into this, into their own exploration of what it means to descend and rise. And my husband hasn't read this book, although I'm going to give it to him. We have talked about the myth, but I've started to witness, I don't know, I think maybe because I've been going through my own journey and I've kind of role modeled and I've changed and he's tried to keep up with me. He's gone through his own journey of descent and rising. And it's been so beautiful to witness, so powerful. And when you meet each other at that same place where you both have risen to, it can feel otherworldly. It can feel so ecstatic. And I just didn't even know that that was possible. And so I just want to encourage women to, if they're in male partnership, to let their partners read this book. It's such a beautiful myth. It's universal. I think it speaks across genders, across identities, and it's so necessary. The learning journey, the roadmap that you offer us in this book. So thank you so, so much. I'm sad to say that we're getting to the end of our conversation, but I would love for you to share anything else that you're called to share with our listeners before we say goodbye.
Yeah, so just to say that there's lots of free resources on my website around this, carlymountain.com. And I'm in the process of writing a new book at the moment, which is all about sex and eroticism, which is coming. So that's in process, which I'm very about. But yeah, please do hop on my website if you're interested to know more, if this is a journey you're going through at the moment and you feel you need support. And just to say thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure to have this conversation with you and spend this time together.
It's been a huge pleasure for me. And I always like to ask my guests before we end, what does pleasure mean to you?
Pleasure to me means being in presence. So I find that when I can really be in my body and in presence with the moment that's happening, pleasure can be found there.
So beautiful. It's this trust with your body that it's so clear. It comes across so clearly.
Yeah. And, even in the difficult times, I find the most painful places are the places where I've disconnected. Whereas when I can feel presence, even in difficulty, to an extent, I can experience some beauty there. Presence for me is such a key component of pleasure.
Thank you so much. Such a gift that you are, Carly Mountain. Thank you so much for being with us today. I will put all of your resources and links to all of your amazing gifts in the show notes. I know that we can find you on Instagram where you share some beautiful musings and poetry. Your voice is magical. I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And thank you everyone for joining us today. May you live in presence and pleasure.